left you, we were on Friday, the devastation of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and all that goes with it, the mockery and the torture, and just all of the darkness of the day. That's where we left off last Sunday. And of course, as we make our way through the gospel story, there's this place where we want to try and identify, what it's like to be in a bad place that you think is never going to end. You've been in a spot in your life that seems to go from one day to 2 to 3 to a week to a month to a year, that it just goes on and on and on. Well, if you have, and I'm sure most of you have, you can imagine what Friday must have been like for the disciples, those who were students and followers of Jesus. All of their hopes and their dreams were dashed as their Messiah was crucified on the cross. Then he was left to be taken down and then placed in a tomb. Well, all of the disciples, or those relatively, most of them who were close to them in the hours before his death, had betrayed and denied and left him when he needed him the most. So not only was he gone, but they had to live with their own shame, their own failures, places in their life where they just missed the mark. They wished they were better than what they were. They just, in the moment when they needed to be, struck out. Well, that was Friday. And then there's Saturday. Now, the scriptures don't tell us a whole lot about Saturday. It was the Sabbath, so people were at rest. But there was much going on behind the scenes that we can't see. The scriptures tell us that in between the time when Jesus was crucified and resurrected, that he descended and he was preaching to the spirits so that those who had gone before them would know new life, just like you and I who have come after him. Behind the scenes, you can't see that going on. It's much like behind the scenes in our lives when we feel devastated and hurt and alone and afraid and isolated and lonely. When we hit those spots, we feel like they're never going to end. But as Saturday passes, it gives way to a new dawn, the dawning of a new day, Sunday. Now, Sunday is where we're going to pick up the story. And as we think about it, we're going to look at one of the encounters that Jesus has. Now, Jesus has moved from a place of being crucified, being placed in a tomb. And I was thinking this week, imagine what it must have been like to be Jesus as he stands on the threshold of the tomb that he has been in. The stone has been rolled away. I wonder what was in his head as he moved from the darkness of the tomb into the light of a new day. I wonder, as he began to think about what that might mean, as he crossed the threshold from the tomb into the light, what was on his mind. It was a small step for Jesus, but it was a large step for mankind, right? It would change the game forever. I wonder what was on his mind. When we look at and listen to the stories in the Gospels, sometimes we become so familiar with them that we forget that they're real, with real people and details that are important for us to consider. I wonder what was on Jesus' mind as he stood at the threshold in the darkness of the tomb, emerging into the light of a new day. I bet it was you and me. I bet it was people who would follow after, who would need to know not only that the resurrection was a historical event for one person, but that it was a future probability for all people. He died for you and me. And he was raised again to new life for you and me. And he offers us the possibility to share in that same life. And that's what we're going to talk about today. If you have a Bible and you want to, you can turn with me to John chapter 21. If not, you can just listen along. Jesus emerged from the tomb and he had begun to show himself to a variety of different people. He encountered Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, Joanna, a lot of women. It's funny, in the Gospels what we find is that it was the women mostly who hung in there when things got tough. Most of the guys checked out. Most of the women hung in there. And they were there when Jesus needed them. And they were the first ones that he revealed himself to when he came back to life. It's a pretty powerful part of the story for us to really understand and appreciate. Well, he also showed himself to two disciples on the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. He also showed himself to Thomas, doubting Thomas. He showed himself to groups of disciples. In fact, this was the third time that we're getting ready to look at that he had actually shown himself to disciples. But what you need to know prior to what we find here is that Peter, the one who most wanted to be available to Jesus when he was alive, and told him that he would be there no matter what, but yet failed him, he has yet to reveal himself to Peter. Peter has heard the news that Jesus is risen, but he hasn't seen it yet. He hasn't had the encounter. So that's going to be important for you to know as we move to John chapter 21. Now, Peter and 6 other disciples go to an area called Galilee. And as they're going there, they're waiting because Jesus had instructed them to go and wait for him. While they're waiting, Peter does the only thing that he knows he can do right, and that's fish. He's just messed up royally. He's lost faith in his ability to trust himself in the deepest places of his heart. And as they wait, perhaps they're hungry, or perhaps he's finding consolation in doing something that he knows how to do. So he and the others go fishing. And this is where we'll pick up the story in verse 4 of chapter 21. It says, "At dawn the disciples saw Jesus standing on the beach, but they couldn't see who he was. And he called out to them, 'Friends, have you caught any fish?'" Like, this is like the first question he's going to ask them. Right, of all the things that Jesus could say to them, this is his question for them. "Hey, have you caught any fish? You got any sea bass in there? I mean, what do you got?" Right? And they replied, "No, we have nothing." So Peter is failing in even the thing he thought he knew to do. Okay? No. Then he said to them, now these are fishermen, right? Then he said to them, "Throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get plenty of fish." Oh, okay, so we've just been throwing our net on the wrong side of the boat. If we just go to the other side of the boat and throw the net, obviously we'll catch some fish. Can you imagine what they must have been thinking? At this point, they don't know that it's Jesus, right? But this is kind of a deja vu experience. They've had this experience before. This happened, this very thing happened to them at the very beginning of when Jesus called them to be his disciples and students and followers right from the beginning. And I want to go back to that passage because it's important, the interplay between the two. This is a deja vu experience for the disciples now. Luke chapter 5, this is the very beginning. One day as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and he taught the crowds from there. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets, and you will catch many fish." "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all night and we didn't catch a thing." In other words, he's thinking to himself, what a waste of time. We just spent the entire night out there. Why in the world would we do this again? But then he says, "But if you say so, we'll try it again." And this time their nets were so full that they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus, and he said, "Oh Lord, please leave me." This is an interesting response. "Oh Lord, please leave me." Why? "I'm too much of a sinner to be around you." He didn't think he was worthy to be in his presence. And isn't that how it often seems to many of us? I'm unworthy to even be in your presence. He didn't get it yet. He was awestruck by the size of the catch, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and they followed Jesus. This was how Peter's journey with Christ began. It began with a supernatural miracle. And in response to the miracle, Peter humbled himself. He opened his heart. He confessed his sin. And he gave his life to Christ, right? Because at the end, when they come in, it says, and as soon as they landed, they left everything and they followed Jesus. This is how it started. It seems to me what Jesus wants to do is give Peter a second chance. Because almost exactly the way he began is the way he's re-encountering him now as he has risen. This is Peter's first time that he's seeing Jesus. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, now, I just want to stop for a moment. The person who wrote this gospel is John. And he calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. It seems a little fishy. It would be one thing if Matthew, Mark, or Luke called him the disciple that Jesus loved, but he doesn't refer to himself by his name. He refers to himself by the disciple whom Jesus loved. Well, anyway, he says to Peter, it's the Lord, Rockhead, it's the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work. Naked fishing, I don't know. I don't know. So he jumped into the water and he swam ashore. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore. Now you think, well, that's impressive, right? He sees Jesus on the shore. He's so excited. He's going to jump in the water. He's going to swim to shore. It must have been like a half a mile, a quarter of a mile. No. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 300 feet. I mean, that's like nothing. Could he not just wait in the boat until everybody got in? No, he could not. He could not. He had lived in shame and humiliation and misery and darkness, and now he gets another chance to engage the one who had given him life in the first place and who was offering it to him again. Now, what would you do if you had the opportunity to escape the shame and the humiliation and the guilt and the self-hatred and the loathing that goes on in your life? If you had the opportunity to begin again, to find anew some hope, some life, you'd jump in the water too, even if you couldn't swim. Now, when they got there, they saw that a charcoal fire was burning and fish were frying over it, and there was bread. Jesus has made them breakfast. Is that weird to anybody but me? Jesus shows up. The first thing he asks them is like, hey, you catch anything? He's got a bunch of fish up there that he's frying up for breakfast, right? He's got bread. Where does it come from? It's as mysterious as his appearance. But he's making them breakfast. He is serving them, just like when he last left them, when he was washing their feet. It's the same Savior. He is risen, but he is the same one serving them, loving them, giving himself to them again, even though they denied him, even though they betrayed him, even though they left him when he needed them the most. Here he is, cooking them breakfast and looking forward to a meal together. Bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. And no one dared ask him if he really was the Lord, because they were sure of it. It's kind of like an awkward situation. You think it's him, you're not quite sure, you sort of think it is. But nobody, it's like the elephant in the room, nobody's asking you, is it Jesus right here? It sounds like Jesus, is it Jesus? Nobody asked him. Okay? Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. But it's the first that he appeared to Peter. Now, as they're having breakfast, They finish, and then Jesus and Peter go for a walk on the beach. Now put yourself in the position of Peter, just if you can. Think about your greatest failure in life and multiply it by 100. And now you're encountering that person that you failed so royally. What would you be feeling in the moment where you are encountering the one that you have failed so miserably? You'd be afraid a little bit. You'd be ashamed. Maybe you'd be excited at the thought that he actually was alive, that it actually wasn't over, that you actually get another chance. I don't know. It had to be some strange mixture of emotions going on inside of him. But they go for a walk on the beach. And as they walk, John tells us that Jesus says to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Was he talking about the other disciples? Was he talking about the nets and the fish? We don't really know. But he asked him a question. He says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." Really? Because the last time you had a chance to show your love for me, it didn't turn out too hot. So let me ask you again. Jesus repeated the question. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. Once more he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" You'd be exasperated by this point, right? Why would someone ask you a question 3 times? Perhaps because you denied him 3 times. Maybe it's part of the restoration of Peter's heart and his mind and his life to have to go back and look at the place where in his false bravado he said to Jesus, "I will go with you to prison and to death." And then when given his first chance to stand up, he denied he ever knew him. Given a second chance, he failed again. And given a third chance, he did it again. And so here is Jesus saying to him, "I want to restore you from your failure. Do you love me?" "Yes, I love you." "Do you really love me?" "Yes, I love you." "Do you love me?" Actually, if you look at the text closely, what you will find is that he does not call him Peter. What does Jesus call him? Simon, son of John. This is what he called him before he was a disciple. Remember, Jesus renamed him Petra, Peter, the rock. Right? He's not calling him that anymore. That's curious to me. Simon, son of John. It's as if Peter is having to restore his relationship with Christ anew. It's as if he's giving him a chance to start afresh from the beginning. This is how he first encountered him. He's not going back to where they last left off. It's almost like, "Hey, I'm Jesus. Who are you?" "Simon, son of John. Nice to meet you." For all of his failures, Jesus is speaking to them, and he is restoring them in a very powerful way. Jesus said to him finally, "Then feed my sheep." Every time what he says to Peter is this: "You know what? You missed the mark. It really doesn't matter if you missed it by a little bit or you missed it entirely. But here's the deal. If you love me, you'll stop moping around and dwelling on your sin, and you'll get back in the game. Because we need you, and I want you on my team." And I just want to speak a word to those of you who are here this morning and who are listening to the story, because this is a place for practical application. Sometimes when we miss the mark royally, we feel awful about it, and then we dwell on it, and it is compounded, and we spiral down, and it gets darker and smaller, our worlds. And so we get to the place where we no longer feel worthy to be. And you need to understand that from this place, for the most extreme example that you could find, one who denies he ever even knew Christ 3 times to relatively insignificant people, that Jesus is restoring this person, and as he is restoring them, he's re-inviting them into the family and into the game. Peter's life is not over. With the resurrection of Jesus Christ comes the possibility for the resurrection of Peter. And so too is the same for you and me. I don't know how you are these days or where you are these days in response to where you feel like you are on your journey. But here's the deal. Wherever it is that you are, you cannot miss the mark too far to not understand that Jesus Christ is one who restores and saves and heals and delivers and resurrects. That's his job. And there is nothing, not anything, that can separate you from his love. He desires to restore you. And so what he shows us in Peter is, let's start again, Peter. Let's just start this thing over again. If you really love me, if you really love me, if you really love me, take care of the people I've entrusted to you. Love people. Serve people. Give your life the way you've seen in me. Be my sheep. Jesus then says, the truth is, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked and go wherever you wanted to. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will direct you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know what kind of death he would die to glorify God. Then Jesus told him, follow me. Follow me. You know, Jesus said this 23 times over the course of the Gospels in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's a very simple phrase, follow me. The invitation to follow is an invitation to become like. That's really what the heart of Christianity is. If you were to ask me, Vincent, what is Christianity about? What is the Christian faith about? It's about an invitation being offered by Jesus Christ, follow me. And it's about you and I deciding whether or not we're going to take up that offer and actually move in a direction to become like him. It doesn't really matter if we believe all the right things, but our life isn't in alignment with the one we're following. To say that Jesus is headed this way, but then my life is out of sync and I'm headed this way, it's confusing to people. To say that I believe this creed, but my life is so out of touch with it, it doesn't make any good sense. What is Christianity? It's an invitation offered by the risen one for us to come and become like him. That's it. So he says, follow me. Let me finish here with the last part of the story. How would you feel if you're Peter now? He's reissued you the invitation. He wants you. Invitations are great. When you get invitations to something special, it makes you feel important, right? What could be more important than Peter being restored to the family of God, to the favor of Christ? Follow me, okay? You would think that he would be in a humble place, ready to follow. Here's what he does. Peter turned around and saw the disciple that Jesus loved. Again, he's calling himself this. Following them. So Peter and Jesus are walking on the beach, but behind them, John is following, right? He doesn't want Peter to get any more than he's going to get. This was the one who leaned over to Jesus during the supper and asked, Lord, who among us will betray you? And then Peter asked Jesus, what about him? What about him, Lord? And Jesus is like, don't focus on him. Why are you focusing on him? Why are you focusing on her? Why are you focusing on them? What concern is it of yours, what they do, where they go, how they live? What issue is that of yours? You hear what I'm saying? Jesus says, follow me. Your focus is me, Jesus says. What would it concern you? What about John? Why don't, just since I've restored you, why don't you just worry about you? How about we do that? Jesus replied, if I wanted to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You follow me. You follow me. Jesus' invitations are invitations to life. They are invitations to abundant life and eternal life. Following Jesus is the best possible life to have. It is not always easy. Sometimes it is very painful. But there is no other better way to live than to follow and be like Christ. It's the best possible life. If there were a better possible life, I'd be pursuing it now. I really would. I desire the very best. And Jesus Christ, with His teachings and with His life, shows us that He offers us the best. He offers us life more abundant. He says, the thief, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. He also offers us life eternal. You heard earlier when we read 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and Paul was talking about how some of us will die, but not all of us. But all of us will be transformed. In the blinking of an eye, our bodies will be transformed into new bodies, resurrected bodies. There is a hope that we have beyond the life that we live. And it enables us to move forward and to go over the obstacles, not around them, not cower in fear. Jesus oftentimes links these two things. He will oftentimes say in the Scriptures, listen, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Just come on. Just follow me. Come on. Don't be afraid. Just come on. Just follow me. Don't be afraid. Why would He say this over and over? Because we're afraid. Because there's stuff in our life that is big and bad and difficult. Life is not easy. It is difficult. And along the way, we mess up royally. But Jesus offers to us what He offers to Peter. He offers us a second and a third and a fourth and a 10th and a 12th chance. This is the good news. This is the gospel, that we don't have to earn it on our own merits. It is by grace that we are saved through faith, not by any works of our own, lest we should boast about how good we are. It is a grace gift. It is an invitation to you and me to follow Christ, to receive His life, to walk in His way. It's the best possible way, now and in the days to come. The hope and the faith of Easter is that what God once did in a graveyard in Jerusalem, that He can and He will repeat on a much grander and wider scale with people like you and me. I picked Peter today because I thought of all of the stories that this is the one that helps people like you and I who fail often to understand that Jesus desires not to press us down when we're down, but to pick us up when we need it. To lead us into a new and living way. When Peter first encountered Jesus, he dropped his nets and he left everything. But the second time he encountered Him, after he had denied Him, that he ever knew Him, he had to drop his fear. He had to drop his failures. He had to drop his preoccupation with what other people were going to do. Sometimes what we hold in our hands are nets, but sometimes we hold in our hands very real obstacles that keep us from listening to the call, the invitation of Christ, and from actually following Him. And I want you to think this morning, as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ and its possibility for your life, I want you to think about the things that you hold in your hands, and if whether or not they're actually keeping you from following Him. Because at the end of the day, if you boil the Christian message down, really what it's all about is an invitation from Christ to us to follow Him, to become like Him. And when we, the church, the people of God, actually become like Him, we will draw people unto Him and not repel them. The problem is, we settle for just learning things about Jesus and saying, wow, what a guy, what a great man He was. We admire Him, but we don't follow Him. And His invitation is to not be afraid to take risk, to let go of the stuff that you've been holding on to for days and weeks and months and years, to let it go and to become like Him. And I want to say to you today, don't be afraid. Some of you are afraid right now of stuff you're facing. Financial issues, relational issues, health issues. Some of you are struggling today in this place, and you're afraid. And I just want to repeat to you the words of Jesus when he says, don't be afraid, follow me. He offers us life abundant, better than we could ever imagine, and he offers us life eternal. It's only going to get better. We have a new and living hope. We don't live in shame. We don't live in fear. We don't live in bondage. It is not for us to be in this place. Christ was raised from the dead so that he could help lead us into the ongoing resurrection that he offers to humanity. And I think today, just as good a time as any, is a time for you to either commit or recommit yourself to receiving the invitation and to following Christ. And so what I want to ask you to do as you're in this place and you're letting some of the thoughts that you've heard settle down into your spirit, I'm going to have a prayer that's going to go up on the screen. And as you're thinking about what you've heard, if this prayer reflects the desire of your heart, then I want to invite you in the quietness of this time to speak it to God quietly, like you mean it. If you're not in a place where it doesn't reflect the desire of your heart, then just wait. I would never rush you into making so great a decision as this. However, if you find yourself in this place and you're desiring to move forward, to drop your nets, whatever they may be, and to move into the life that is really life, whether it be your first time or you're recommitting like Peter did, I want to invite you to look at the words of that prayer and pray them quietly. And as you're doing so, the worship team is going to come back and they're going to sing a song. And as you're thinking about where you are and what God has for you in this place, they're going to just kind of quietly sing. And I just want you to be present to the God that we invited to be present to you when we first started. Okay? So let's let this be a moment where we're thinking about and responding to God's desire for our life.